Newman gave a series of lectures between 1830 and 1841 in defense of Anglicanism's via media as spiritually prudent and the work of divine grace. But the scandal of the Jerusalem bishopric in 1841, which laid aside religious differences between Anglicans and Lutherans for the sake of practicality, would open Newman's eyes to the fact that the true via media is a declaration of precision and not vagueness. And so he says, take England with many high virtues and yet a low Catholicism. It seems to me that John Bull is a spirit neither of heaven nor hell. Has not the Christian Church in its parts surrendered itself to one or other of these simulations of the truth? How are we to avoid scilla and characters and go straight on to the very image of Christ? The subjective substitute for the classical golden mean is not modern but postmodern. Since the philosophical quality of our culture has tumbled from those parapets upon which wrong but well-trained thinkers could declare that the only certitude is that nothing is certain. But today, what Pope Benedict has tagged the dictatorship of relativism is seen in a blithe rejection of Christian essentials by vestigial Anglicanism. Not because these essentials are hard to believe, but because they were never really learned. And so let us uncork the wine of Newman, for what he preached while still an Anglican has now found its target. He says this: surely there is at this day a confederacy of evil, marshalling its hosts from all parts of the world, organizing itself, taking its measures, and closing the Church of Christ as in a net, and preparing the way for a general apostasy from it. Whether this very apostasy is to give birth to Antichrist, or whether he is still to be delayed, as he has already been delayed so long, we cannot know. But at any rate, this apostasy and all its tokens and instruments are of the evil one, and savor of death. Far be it from any of us to be of those simple ones who are taken in that snare which is circling around us. Far be it from us to be seduced with the fair promises in which Satan is sure to hide his poison. Do you think he is so skillful in his craft as to ask you openly and plainly to join him in his warfare against the truth? No. He offers you baits to tempt you. He promises you civil liberty. He promises you equality. He promises you trade and wealth. He promises you a remission of taxes. He promises you reform. This is the way in which he conceals from you the kind of work to which he is putting you. He tempts you to rail against your rulers and superiors. He does so himself and induces you to imitate him. Or he promises you illumination. He offers you knowledge, science, philosophy, enlargement of mind. He scoffs at times gone by. He scoffs at every institution which reveres them. He prompts you what to say, and then listens to you and praises you and encourages you. He bids you mount aloft. He shows you how to become as gods. And he laughs and jokes with you and gets intimate with you. He takes your hand and gets his fingers between yours and grasps them, and then you are his. Pope Benedict XVI has done a stunning thing in providing such an ecclesial structure as described in this apostolic constitution, Anglicanorum. The dilemma of Anglicans maintaining a firm if incomplete belief in the supernatural character of the Apostolic Church, when contradicted by postmodern forces who would reduce the creedal formulas to impressions of reality, is a cultural icon of the spiritual combat between virtue and egoism which defines the crisis of our entire age. While only the Pope knows what he's doing, I suspect this Constitution is a shot fired over the bow of secular cynicism, which is entwining its fingers with the men and women of our generation to make us one with the enemy of our Creator. Consider how many Catholics have reduced sacred worship to a suburban expression of goodwill. It is evidence of the creeping banality by which the Prince of Lies would seduce Holy Church herself, though he is bound to fare with that same mediocrity which repulsed Newman. For Newman knew that banality is indeed evil and possibly crueler than pre-Christian paganism, which danced in sensuality and Arcadian groves, without feeling a post-Christian need to declare perversity a sacrament. As late as 1835, and 10 years before his conversion, Newman associated the Antichrist with the papacy and returned from his first visit to Rome in 1833, calling Catholicism polytheistic, degrading, and idolatrous. Gradual experience of alternatives to Catholicism, however, especially the skepticism of the broad church Anglicanism of his coterie, trimmed his judgment. He says, "We are much disposed to question whether any tests can prove that the Roman Communion is the synagogue of Satan." His friendly battles in Oxford with his mentor, Richard Whately, whom I mentioned, professor of political economy, battles which he said continued when he was starting the Catholic University in Dublin, where Whately had become Anglican Archbishop, moved him to reflect more on the Catholic claims. Whately was a fair-minded man who advocated civil rights for Catholics and Jews. He had his own sense of humor, which inspired him to satirize the new skeptical biblical critics by writing an essay using their principles to prove that Napoleon Bonaparte never existed. In this, he was a precursor of Ronald Knox, who a century later used modern canons of literary criticism to prove that Tennyson's poem In Memoriam had in fact been written by Queen Victoria. In treating virtue ethics and the Greek ideal of happiness, beatitude, eudaimonia, it was Dr. Whately who said splendidly, "Happiness is no laughing matter." Newman inherited something of this subtlety, and this should help to make sense of what Newman meant later when he said, "As a Protestant, I felt my religion dreary, but not my life. But as a Catholic, my life dreary, not my religion." Understanding true happiness as the attainment of truth, he was ready to sacrifice lesser consolations in order to find it, like Augustine, exulting in the discovery of beauty ever ancient, ever new. The recent proposal of a personal ordinariate for Anglicans is an invitation to such eudaimonia. Newman preached big words to a small scene in his day. He was addressing a national apostasy, which is now universal. If national apostasy seemed an inflated term when Keble decried the government's confusion of bishops with state managers, Newman did not see it so, and he called it the start of the Oxford movement. The Oxford movement has now become a world movement, sometimes called a reform of the reform. The kind of aggiornamento optimistically envisioned, but imprecisely achieved in the years after Vatican II.